Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. I'm Greg Burke, and now in my 24th year as Director of Athletics at Northwestern State University. Creating an environment in which student athletes and young professionals can develop skill sets to make them successful in any walk of life is invaluable. Mentors can provide an extra measure of confidence by helping them grow, by seeking their input, and by listening to their ideas. This and much more can be found in Will Baggett and Ty Brown's book, The Blueprint for a Successful Career, a foundation for developing young professionals. Find it on Amazon.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Jeff Fucci. Jeff is the Associate Athletics Director for Capital Projects and Innovation at USC. Greetings, Jeff. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ty. Thanks for having me.
Now, Jeff, you spent most of your career there at Southern Cal, spending some time as Director of Operations with football and some time in facilities management and oversight. With almost 12 years in the industry, and now you find yourself working on capital projects and innovation. I guess the first question for me is kind of a curiosity question, but tell me about that title, Capital Projects and Innovation. Tell me about what you do in that role.
So primarily the role focuses on oversight of capital projects for athletics. And that can be anything, Ty, from a small project that we're looking at improvements to an existing building and something that we might interface with our campus partners on from a maintenance standpoint, or even things more long-term in terms of developing a strategic plan for capital projects over the next 10 years. So if it has to do with improvements to our facilities or new athletic facilities to support student athletes, and involves us having to expend dollars on that are outside of our annual budgets, that would fall within my purview. And then I would have a team of campus partners, external architects and consultants that would work with me in order to deliver this for our athletics program. On the innovation piece, what ties into it, it was heavily tied to the Coliseum and efforts we were trying to advance in terms of the fan experience at the Coliseum and where the interplay of technology and fan experience were connecting, and looking at that as a foundation for how we might bridge technology into our other venues in athletics to create kind of one ubiquitous experience where technology more and more becomes something that is a fan experience enhancement and something that folks become comfortable with. So the more that we could provide some level of consistency in how we tie that in from the Coliseum and then ultimately other venues, that's a lot of sort of where the innovation piece comes in, is looking to new opportunities. Oftentimes those are facilitated by emerging technologies.
Right. It's interesting. So it's heavy involvement with the Coliseum there, as well as the other facilities and athletic venues there on campus. But the Coliseum is one of the major ones that you tie to with your position.
Yeah, the Coliseum was a project that I was privileged to work on and help lead with a great team. This one really took a village. It was something that began actually 6 years ago, and from a development standpoint and what was necessary in order for the university to gain a master lease that would ultimately allow us to make physical improvements to the building for the long term. So with USC Athletics, we had spent a lot of resources and planning around how we would elevate that venue to be as state-of-the-art as we could, knowing the competitive landscape in Los Angeles with a beautiful stadium coming at SoFi Stadium. We have the LAFC Stadium, which has done tremendous things with technology, and just expectations of the USC and LA fan that has seen the advancements in terms of stadium and venue technology in a way where it actually improves their experience. That's the key piece, is improves the fan experience. There has to be something at stake for the fan to really feel like they would utilize and adds value. We wanted to be at the forefront of that. And we knew we couldn't do it all in year one. We knew it was setting a foundation and a crawl, walk, run approach in terms of how we would onboard those technologies, introduce them to our fans. So I think as a team, the Coliseum was a great opportunity for us to explore, to utilize new technologies in that space, and then recognize those opportunities that may be a fit to bridging over to locations like our Galen Arena or our baseball venue. So the Coliseum was really the catalyst for a lot of technology-driven research, and then ways that we could sort of leverage things from the Coliseum to our other athletic venues.
Right, right. Interesting. Very interesting on making that the centerpiece for expanding everything else. I grew up in Inglewood, California, and my parents, when I was real young, they went to the Coliseum to see Carl Lewis in the '84 Olympics. And then, of course, I think went to a Raiders game. I was real young. Marcus Allen was playing, and I think in high school years, maybe mid '90s, might have went to a game where USC was playing. So I have a little bit of experience with the Coliseum, and I
Okay,
think
great. Great.
I think the talk for years and years, all through those years, was about improving the Coliseum, making suites, just because it was built a long time ago for the Olympics. But I wonder now, we're here in this stage of human history of the pandemic, right? I mean, the projects you work on, if possible, they had to continue being worked on, or everything had to come to a hold. Tell me about how you manage capital projects during the pandemic, and if you guys have been able to do that, or you specifically have been able to do that.
Yeah, it's been a new challenge to take on, certainly for everyone. And in that space of capital projects, as great as the challenge the Coliseum was, trying to complete that project in the COVID period would have been extremely unique. We're focused right now at USC on four major capital projects that are taking place, and one feasibility study that's going to be really important and is in an initial design development phase. But really, as we approached it, Ty, it was something that I really looked at a portfolio approach and trying to manage risk and looking at, we have short-term projects, midterm projects, and long-term projects. And how do those influence a return to use? What's the seasonality that that venue needs to be available for student athletes? And then something that might be a long-term project, what can we look at in terms of providing flexibility where a launch might not necessarily be in a competition season? Could it perhaps be during a preparation period or an appropriate time where you could much easier onboard a user group into a building? So we looked at the portfolio approach piece. And when we think about managing risk, the other pieces we need to understand as we advance these projects, what are the possible mitigation efforts that we could have? What do we have at our disposal and levers to pull to help us when there's a lot of uncertainty? So I would say talking to others in the space has been really helpful. I think it's something where having partners on these projects is critically important. Knowing we're in this together, we have to have open communication and collaboration because things like schedules are going to have to change, but also the efforts that we make and how we utilize our time and efforts has to pivot. So as much as possible, we've been focused on is if we can get from a city standpoint what's required for site inspections and permits front loaded, knowing that the city is going through this challenge as well, we quickly learned we have to get as much of this documentation in as possible early. We also need to think about on these project sites, how much work can we complete? How many different trades can we maybe coordinate to call for inspection? So we're being mindful of if the city's time is taxed and we need to bring folks out for us to advance the next stage, we want to have as much as possible available for them to review.
It sounds like you mentioned mitigation early on. Mitigating risks involved administrative paperwork, files, forms, licenses, and applications that you knew had to be done, that you can get as much done as possible. And then when you talk about supplies and choosing supplies, I'm sure that probably had to be a bit difficult when you talk about doing everything virtually. Did you have to go on site for things? Did you have to meet people? I mean, how much did the lockdown affect in terms of that? And then the adjustment you had to make if a supplier said, hey, I don't know if we're going to be able to deliver this. Like, tell me about those aspects of managing capital projects while we're in a pandemic.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say first and foremost, Ty, from a campus perspective, the safety of all of our campus partners, whether it's a contractor, subcontractor, or those that are deemed to be essential and on campus, we have very strict provisions that are being followed. And if someone were not to be in adherence, we'll throw someone off the site for the day and they'll no longer be able to work. So everyone's taking it very seriously. But there is an in-person element or review, like you're talking about for materials or submittals. It's really difficult to make a call on an item that might be a key element of, say, our current track and field Hall of Fame building and not be able to touch and feel a carpet or a tile or a wall tile. So what we've done is we created this virtual submittal process where it is a combination of something over Zoom where you can have a discussion with the architect or consultant, but you do have to go in person. And we've done it a couple ways. One is leaving the item on site in a secure location where someone could go pick it up, take it to their home. And then once everyone has that item, those constituents that need to be on a Zoom call, we all get on a Zoom call at the same time, and we can touch and feel the item and have it in our hands. So we've done that one. In the case where we have some larger items where it's maybe not practical to leave at a pickup location, we've had items left in a conference room. That room is available for someone to schedule a period where they can come in, provide their review and comment, and then share that. And then another hour, another period, someone else who's part of that key stakeholder group would come review and then join that space, see the item, touch the item, and then depart the space. So it may mean just a little bit more work for everyone, but I think everyone understands that the end goal, that's what we need to do to accomplish it.
Right. Were there some challenges you had to face in terms of suppliers and the logistics aspects of it, of people who thought they could deliver but probably couldn't deliver, or finding new suppliers, just all those things that obviously you and I know come with putting on a major capital project like the ones you're talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting. If we talk about that portfolio approach and sort of the short-term, midterm, long-term, it's interesting that the short-term projects to midterm, which I would categorize midterm as 2 to 6 months, those in some ways are more difficult tightrope walk in terms of suppliers, because you don't have that margin for error, and you might be dealing with a more limited pool of suppliers depending on the project. So an example might be, we're working on a weight room renovation right now, a full overhaul of a weight room that services all of our sports in the arena. And we're working with a specific provider on the weight room equipment. There's some specific providers in that space that pass muster with our strength and conditioning coaches. And they certainly pre-COVID had a desire to work with one company. We advanced everything from a design standpoint, funded, we're ready to execute, all pre-COVID. And then we went into this new environment just shortly before we're about to contract. So with this particular project, we looked at an alternate vendor should the primary vendor falter and be unable to deliver and produce. This vendor we're working with is actually out of state. So their state has actually had less restrictions in terms of their work requirements at the early stages of COVID. But even with that being the case, we still kept another vendor that was more local on the ready, and went through the initial process of asking them to bid, provide quotes, and design just in case we had issue. Fortunately, at this stage, with our once per week check-ins with this weight equipment provider, we haven't run into any problems. They're hitting all their key markers, and we look like we're on schedule for delivery. But with these midterm projects, you have a smaller scope, so you don't have as many items that you can sort of shuffle to the front or the back of the project. We have a much longer 12 to 14 month project. We're building a new track and field Hall of Fame and office buildings for our coaches and student athletes. In that project, you have some flexibility where if the supplier is 6 to 8 weeks behind, we can just move their delivery date and move another trade around them. So that's where we really have to look at how we manage risk and using the portfolio approach. And in some ways, a longer lead project provides you more flexibility. But we've also just made efforts on even a longer lead project where we need to get orders in. And even though folks may think this seems sort of early to make a decision on a trellis on a roof deck or a finish that's going to go inside of the kitchen, we're going to go ahead and just front load it and get in now, and control those areas where we feel like we have some influence on schedule.
It sounds to me like, if organized correctly, the portfolio approach you've mentioned has been a lifesaver in terms of working on things through the pandemic with you there at USC. You know, I do wonder, when you talk about capital projects, it's about donors and their involvement with the progress, their involvement with the process and input and everything else. Tell me about your interaction with donors, or if not yours, then the athletics department's interaction with donors in terms of the capital projects that you're working on.
Yeah, that's a great question, and absolutely key to the success of any capital project. And, you know, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our athletic director, Mike Bone, has been an incredible leader to help support these capital projects, especially at a critical phase where these projects, some of which were planned 5 years in advance with very long fundraising campaigns and passionate donors who really want to see these projects completed to fulfill, for some, which was a vision they've had for many, many years and a legacy that they want to leave for a particular sport. Mike has been a champion for us on campus, communicating with the senior leadership of the university, making certain there's clear understanding of what we're doing, how we're doing it, that these projects are critical resources for our student athletes, how they'll impact student athletes, and that we've have them funded. And that was a key piece. These projects were pre-planned and pre-funded prior to COVID, almost exclusively through donor support. So what we've tried to do is really bring the donors along in this process to help them feel the influence they're making for student athletes. Where sports are at a standstill in many ways, and we're not seeing the competition on the quarter field, sort of behind the scenes, we're going to advance our programs. When our student athletes return, they're going to see either projects completed or projects that have made huge steps forward that they'll ultimately be the beneficiary of. And the competitive aspect of that, letting the donors know that there's such a key part of making this happen, that their gift is going to something that's actively taking action now, has really been inspiring for them. And then we've really tried to communicate heavily, whether it's Zoom and getting their feedback in terms of story mining and understanding if we're building a Hall of Fame space, how does this program resonate for you? What memories are important and how that might influence what we're doing in an early stage of designing graphics and branding and some of the historical elements that are there. And then sharing with some who really want to be kept in the loop closely, photos. Here's photos of the progress. So you can see each and every day that these projects have not halted. We have good communication. They're hearing it directly from USC that we're continuing to work, as there's a lot of information that's coming to them. That's for anyone in the COVID environment. There's many different news sources that are coming at them, and there's constantly questions. Does this affect us? Where does this mean the project is? So from the athletics team, our effort has been really to be inclusive of the communication and make them feel a part of the process. And I think that's been really helpful for us. And it's been, whether it's Zoom, phone calls, text messages. For one project, we have an active construction camera, which has been great. They can monitor that. They can also take me on my cell phone and say, Jeff, what the heck's going on? Can you speed things up out there? What are you doing today? So that's been interesting. They have a window and a peek into what's going on the site each and every day, particularly with our large track and field project. So the inclusivity, communication, and then making them feel a part of the team, that they're making a difference, I think has been really helpful and appreciated.
Which I'm sure they appreciate. You know, when I asked you about your position, you talked about innovation and tying it to capital projects and a lot of things tying to the Coliseum. I wonder about the fan experience, right? When you talk about taking on a big project like the Coliseum, which you said conversation started 6 some odd years ago, you talk about improved fan experience facilitated by technology, which were your words you told me offline. Tell me about that in terms of safety, experience, now the lens of the pandemic and all that at the Coliseum, and how the innovation and technology is built into that as you move forward.
Yeah, I was glad we got a chance to talk on that a little bit. And I know it was something we were speaking about offline, and how does it relate in terms of the ongoing capital projects that we're doing now. The Coliseum project was complete last September, and we welcomed it in. And a big effort was laying a foundation for technology in what was a 95-plus-year-old stadium that was really devoid of technology. And the efforts that were made were for the 2019 season, but really for growth and to be able to expand and build on a network that's there in terms of a converged network that supports Wi-Fi and all the digital technologies in the building, how we can scale that. And I'm an optimist, so I look at the COVID period and the challenges that are there in terms of being able to safely welcome fans. The utilization of technology, in some ways, it will be an accelerator for positive change, where technology in many ways can facilitate the contactless, the frictionless things. There are a lot of buzzwords that everyone's reading about and hearing about in terms of any type of return to stadium play scenario. So I think the adoption of these technologies becomes sort of couched under the idea that it certainly is for the health and safety and wellness of all patrons, but really it will advance adoption and the recognition of these technologies are here to really improve the fan experience. That's why we have them.
Right. So you guys put all that stuff in place for the obvious reasons, right? To make the experience for attendees better. But now those obvious reasons have a little more meaning when you talk about the pandemic, and you're probably looking at ways to make things even better when you talk about returning to campus. This, Jeff, has been an excellent and educational conversation for me. I really appreciate you joining us here on One Question.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ty. It's a pleasure. and really enjoy listening to your podcast and get a lot out of it. So look forward to continuing our conversations offline. And again, appreciate you having me on.
That was Jeff Fucci. He's the Associate Athletics Director for Capital Projects and Innovation at University of Southern California. And of course, this is Ty Brown with one question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.